In 1983, David and Katie Schwartz shared one final embrace before their horse and buggy disappeared into the Pennsylvania countryside forever. What happened during those 3 missing years haunts investigators to this day. Why was their buggy found mangled beyond recognition? What did the authorities discover that they never released to the public? And most disturbing of all, where are David and Katie now? The answer will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this quiet Amish community. Take a second before we start. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's amazing to witness how these forgotten stories connect us all. David Schwartz was 24 years old when he met Katie Miller at a barn raising in Lancaster County. She was 19, with bright eyes and a gentle smile that made David's heart skip. In the Amish community, finding your life partner is sacred. David and Katie seemed made for each other. They shared the same values, the same faith, and the same dream of a simple life together. Their courtship followed every Amish tradition perfectly. Sunday visits, chaperoned walks, and long talks about their future farm. Everyone in their community expected them to marry and raise many children. But fate had different plans. On September 15, 1983, David hitched up his best horse to the family buggy. Katie climbed in beside him wearing her finest blue dress. They were heading to visit Katie's sister in the next township. What should have been a simple 2-hour trip became the beginning of Pennsylvania's most puzzling mystery. Katie's mother, Sarah Miller, watched from the kitchen window as the young couple drove away. She later told police it was the last time she saw her daughter alive. The buggy disappeared down the dirt road, wheels creaking softly in the afternoon silence. David's father had checked the buggy that morning. The wheels were solid, the harness was strong, and the horse was calm and healthy. Everything seemed perfect for their journey. But sometimes perfect isn't enough. The Amish community doesn't use phones or cars, so when David and Katie didn't return by sunset, worry began to spread. Katie's sister lived only 8 miles away. Even with a slow horse, they should have been home by dark. Sarah Miller paced her kitchen floor all night, listening for the sound of buggy wheels. She never heard them. By morning, the entire community knew something was terribly wrong. The search was about to begin. In Amish country, when someone doesn't come home, the whole community acts like family. By dawn on September 16th, over 50 men were ready to search. They knew every road, every farm, and every shortcut between the 2 townships. These weren't city folk who might get lost. David had traveled this route dozens of times since childhood. The search team split into groups. Some took the main road David and Katie should have used. Others checked back roads and alternate paths. Every barn, every field, and every creek was searched carefully. The Amish have a saying, "A horse knows the way home." But David's horse never made it back. As the sun climbed higher, the search grew more desperate. They found nothing, no tracks, no broken buggy parts, no sign of the horse. It was as if David, Katie, and their buggy had simply vanished into thin air. But people don't just disappear, or do they? The Lancaster County Sheriff's Department got the call at 3 p.m. on September 16th. Missing persons cases involving the Amish were rare, but not unheard of. Sheriff Tom Bradley had worked with the Amish community for over 20 years. He knew they didn't panic easily. If they were asking for help, something was seriously wrong. When Sheriff Bradley arrived at the Miller farm, he found a community in quiet desperation. The Amish don't show emotion the way outsiders do, but he could see the fear in their eyes. Sarah Miller sat in her kitchen, hands folded, staring at the window where she'd last seen her daughter. She spoke softly to the sheriff, describing every detail of that final goodbye. The sheriff took notes, but his heart was already sinking. In cases like this, the first 24 hours were critical. They were already past that deadline. The real investigation was about to begin, and it would uncover secrets nobody expected. Sheriff Bradley called in every available deputy and volunteer. The search area grew from 8 miles to 30 miles in all directions. Maybe David and Katie had taken a wrong turn. Maybe their horse had gotten spooked and run off the main road. Maybe they were injured somewhere, waiting for help. The volunteers included local farmers, hunters, and anyone who knew the countryside. They searched on foot, on horseback, and in pickup trucks. Helicopters from the state police joined the search on day 3. The Amish community provided food and water for all the searchers. They were grateful for the help, even though they didn't usually involve outsiders in their problems. Radio stations across Pennsylvania broadcast descriptions of the missing couple. David was tall and thin with dark hair and a beard. Katie was petite with blonde hair, always covered by her prayer cap. Their buggy was black with yellow reflectors. Someone, somewhere, must have seen them. But the days passed with no news. The mystery was just beginning. On day 5 of the search, a farmer named Joe Patterson made an odd discovery. He found a piece of black painted wood stuck in a fence post about 15 miles from where David and Katie had last been seen. It looked like it could be from a buggy, but it was in the wrong direction from their planned route. Why would they have gone that way? Sheriff Bradley bagged the wood as evidence. The lab would test it later, but it would be weeks before results came back. Meanwhile, other strange clues began appearing. A horse's hoof print was found in mud near a creek, but it was alone. Where was the buggy? Where were the other 3 hoof prints? A torn piece of blue fabric was discovered hanging on a tree branch. It matched the color of Katie's dress. But the fabric was 7 miles away from the wooden piece. The clues were scattered in all directions, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together. After 2 weeks of searching, the Amish community held a prayer service for David and Katie. They didn't give up hope, but they needed to ask God for strength. The service was held in the same barn where David and Katie had first met. Over 200 people attended, filling every corner with quiet prayers and hymns. The Amish believe that everything happens for a reason, even when that reason is impossible to understand. But faith doesn't make the pain go away. Katie's mother grew thin and pale, barely eating or sleeping. David's father stopped smiling, something neighbors had never seen before. The young couple had been planning to marry in November. Katie had already started making her wedding dress. It hung in her bedroom closet, a reminder of dreams that might never come true. The community took care of both families, bringing food and help with daily chores. They would not let grief destroy what remained. But questions haunted everyone's thoughts. As news of the missing couple spread, tips began pouring into the sheriff's office. A trucker claimed he saw an Amish buggy on Highway 30 the night they disappeared. A gas station owner thought he saw a young Amish woman buying supplies 3 counties away. Every tip had to be investigated, even though most led nowhere. Sheriff Bradley and his deputies drove hundreds of miles chasing false leads. They questioned dozens of people who thought they'd seen David and Katie. One woman was certain she'd seen them at a bus station in Philadelphia. Another claimed they were living on a farm in Ohio. Each false lead raised hopes, then crushed them again. The hardest part was telling the families that the latest tip hadn't panned out. Sarah Miller would look up hopefully every time the sheriff arrived, then her face would fall when she saw his expression. The real clues were still out there somewhere, waiting to be found, but where? As 1983 turned into 1984, winter blanketed Lancaster County with snow. The search had to be called off until spring. Snow covered any remaining clues that might have been missed. The Amish families continued their daily routines, but the missing couple was never far from their thoughts. Katie's room remained exactly as she'd left it. Her mother would sit there sometimes, holding her daughter's prayer book and wondering if she'd ever see her again. David's father kept his son's tools cleaned and ready, hoping David would return to use them. The winter months were the hardest. Without active searching, families had too much time to think about what might have happened. Some people believed David and Katie had run away together to start a new life outside the Amish community. Others feared something much worse had occurred. The truth was hiding under the snow, waiting for spring to reveal its secrets. And when it did, the discovery would shock everyone. When the snow melted in March 1984, the search resumed with new energy. Volunteers who had helped the previous fall returned to look for clues that winter might have preserved. The Pennsylvania State Police assigned a new detective to the case. Detective Maria Santos had solved several missing persons cases in her career. She brought fresh eyes and new ideas to the investigation. Detective Santos spent hours interviewing everyone who had been involved in the original search. She created detailed maps showing where every clue had been found. The scattered pieces of evidence formed a strange pattern across the countryside. It didn't look random anymore. It looked like someone had deliberately placed clues to confuse the investigation. But who would do such a thing, and why? The detective had a theory, but she needed more evidence to prove it. The breakthrough would come from an unexpected source in a place nobody had thought to look. On April 15, 1984, a group of local teenagers were exploring caves near the Susquehanna River. They weren't supposed to be there. The caves were dangerous, and parents had warned kids to stay away. But teenagers don't always listen to warnings. Tommy Richardson and his friends were using flashlights to explore the deepest parts of the cave system. They were looking for bats and interesting rock formations. What they found instead changed everything. In a narrow passage about 50 feet underground, Tommy's flashlight beam caught something that didn't belong. It was a piece of leather harness, the kind used on Amish buggies. It was old and dirty, but it was definitely from a horse's harness. Tommy grabbed the leather and raced back to tell his friends. They knew immediately what it might mean. The missing couple's buggy had used leather harness just like this. But how had it gotten so deep underground? The answer would lead to the first major breakthrough in the case. Detective Santos rappelled into the cave system with a team of experienced spelunkers. The caves were more extensive than anyone had realized. Some passages stretched for miles underground, connecting to other cave systems throughout the region. The piece of harness Tommy had found was just the beginning. As they explored deeper, they discovered more evidence. Pieces of wood that looked like they came from a buggy, scraps of fabric that matched Katie's dress. Most disturbing of all, they found horse bones scattered throughout one large chamber. The bones were old but not ancient. They could have been there for months, not years. Detective Santos carefully collected every piece of evidence. The cave system was like a giant puzzle box, hiding secrets in its dark passages. But the most important question remained unanswered. How had David, Katie, and their buggy ended up in these underground chambers? The answer would require understanding something most people didn't know about the caves. Local historians revealed that the cave system had been used for decades by people who wanted to hide things. During Prohibition, bootleggers had stored illegal alcohol in the caves. During the Underground Railroad, escaped slaves had hidden there while traveling north to freedom. The caves had entrances that most people didn't know about. Some opened into ravines. Others were hidden behind thick brush and trees. Detective Santos realized that someone could have forced David and Katie into the caves. But why? And what had happened to them once they were underground? The detective studied old maps of the cave system. She found references to passages that connected to areas where other clues had been discovered. The scattered evidence wasn't random after all. It was a trail leading through the underground passages. Someone had been moving things through the caves, covering their tracks. But they had missed a few pieces. Those missed pieces were about to solve the mystery. Detective Santos spread her maps across the conference table at the sheriff's office. Red pins marked where each piece of evidence had been found. Blue pins showed cave entrances. Green pins marked where witnesses had reported seeing suspicious activity. When she connected the pins with string, a clear pattern emerged. The evidence trail led from the road where David and Katie had disappeared, through the cave system, and out to various locations across 3 counties. Someone had been systematically moving evidence through the underground passages. But this wasn't a random crime. It was carefully planned by someone who knew the caves intimately. The detective realized she was looking for a local person, someone who had grown up in the area and knew secrets that most people didn't. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn. The buggy had been found mangled beyond recognition because it had been deliberately destroyed to hide the truth. On May 3, 1986, 3 years after David and Katie's disappearance, a park ranger discovered their buggy in a deep ravine near the Susquehanna River. It was crushed and twisted beyond recognition. The wooden frame was shattered into dozens of pieces. The metal parts were bent and broken. It looked like the buggy had fallen from a great height and hit the rocky bottom of the ravine. But Detective Santos knew better. Her investigation of the caves had revealed the truth. The buggy hadn't fallen into the ravine by accident. It had been pushed there deliberately after being destroyed somewhere else. The person responsible had used the cave system to transport the pieces, then dumped them in the ravine to make it look like an accident. The buggy was mangled beyond recognition because someone wanted to destroy evidence of what had really happened. But why go to such extreme lengths? What were they trying to hide? The Pennsylvania State Police Crime Lab spent weeks examining every piece of the destroyed buggy. What they found was shocking. The wood hadn't been damaged by a fall. It had been deliberately broken with tools, probably an axe or sledgehammer. The metal parts showed signs of being bent with machinery, not impact damage. Most telling of all, they found traces of blood on several pieces. The blood was human, and it was old enough to match the timeline of David and Katie's disappearance. But here's what made Detective Santos's blood run cold. The blood wasn't just from one person. Lab tests showed it came from 2 different people, matching the blood types of both David and Katie. This wasn't an accident or a case of people running away to start a new life. This was evidence of violence, carefully hidden by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The investigation had just become a double murder case. Detective Santos had been building a profile of the killer for months. The person had to be local, familiar with the caves, and strong enough to destroy a buggy and move the pieces. They also had to be someone who could get close to David and Katie without raising suspicion. The Amish community was tight-knit and cautious around strangers. In July 1986, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. An elderly Amish man named Samuel Yoder approached Detective Santos with information he'd been afraid to share. 3 years earlier, on the day David and Katie disappeared, Samuel had seen someone he knew near the cave entrances. The person was acting strangely, looking around nervously and carrying tools. Samuel hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now he realized it might be important. The person Samuel had seen was Marcus Webb, a local handyman who had worked for many Amish families. Marcus knew the caves well because he'd explored them as a child. Marcus Webb was 35 years old in 1983. He lived alone in a small house near the caves and made his living doing odd jobs for Amish families. He was strong, reliable, and knew how to fix almost anything. Most importantly, the Amish trusted him. He was one of the few outsiders they allowed into their community. But Marcus had a secret that nobody knew. He was deeply in debt to dangerous people who loaned money at high interest rates. By September 1983, he owed over $50,000 to loan sharks who were threatening to hurt him if he didn't pay. Marcus was desperate. He needed money fast, and he knew the Amish often kept large amounts of cash in their homes. They didn't use banks like other people. On September 15, 1983, Marcus saw David and Katie driving their buggy on the lonely road near the caves. A terrible plan began forming in his mind. He was about to make the worst decision of his life. Marcus Webb knew the road David and Katie were traveling. He also knew they would be carrying money to pay for supplies they planned to buy. He positioned himself at a spot where the road curved near the cave entrance. When the buggy appeared, Marcus stepped into the road and waved them down. David and Katie recognized him immediately. He had fixed their family's water pump just the month before. They trusted him completely. Marcus told them his truck had broken down and asked if they could help him move some tools from the cave where he'd been working. David and Katie were kind people who always helped their neighbors. They followed Marcus to the cave entrance, leading their horse and buggy. Once they were inside the cave, Marcus's desperation took over. He demanded money at gunpoint. David tried to protect Katie, but Marcus was stronger and armed. What happened next in those dark caves would haunt the investigation for years to come. Detective Santos pieced together the events from evidence found in the caves and Marcus Webb's eventual confession. When David tried to protect Katie, Marcus panicked and shot him. Katie screamed, and Marcus realized he couldn't let her leave alive to identify him. He shot her too, then stood in the darkness wondering what to do next. He had killed 2 innocent people for money they didn't even have with them. The cash David and Katie carried was only $23 for small purchases. Marcus had destroyed 2 lives and ruined his own for less than $25. But the killing was only the beginning of his crimes. Marcus spent the next 3 days moving evidence through the cave system. He dismantled the buggy piece by piece, broke it apart with tools, and scattered the pieces across multiple locations. He even killed their horse to eliminate witnesses. The planning that went into covering up his crimes was almost as evil as the murders themselves. Marcus Webb's cover-up was elaborate and cruel. He used his knowledge of the cave system to transport evidence to different locations over several weeks. He buried David and Katie's bodies in a remote section of the caves that he thought would never be found. He scattered pieces of their buggy across 3 counties, making it look like they had traveled in different directions. He even planted fake clues to mislead investigators. The piece of blue fabric found hanging on a tree branch. Marcus had torn it from Katie's dress and placed it there to make searchers think she had passed that way. The scattered hoof prints near the creek? Marcus had led the horse there before killing it, creating false evidence. For 3 years, Marcus watched as the Amish community grieved and searchers looked in all the wrong places. He attended prayer services and even helped with searches, pretending to care while knowing exactly what had happened. His deception was finally about to be exposed. In August 1986, Detective Santos arrested Marcus Webb at his home. She had enough evidence to charge him with double murder, but she wanted a confession to help find David and Katie's bodies. Marcus had lived with guilt for 3 years. When Detective Santos confronted him with the evidence, he broke down and confessed everything. He led investigators to the cave chamber where he had buried David and Katie. Their bodies were found exactly where he said they would be. The Amish community finally had closure, but it came with devastating pain. These were people who believed in forgiveness, but Marcus Webb had tested that faith to its limits. He had not only killed their children, but had watched them suffer through 3 years of not knowing what had happened. The confession answered many questions, but it raised others. How could someone they trusted commit such evil acts? The community would need time to heal from this betrayal. Marcus Webb's trial began in February 1987. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of his guilt. The defense tried to argue that the killings were accidental, that Marcus had only meant to rob the couple, and the shooting was unintentional. But the elaborate cover-up proved otherwise. You don't spend weeks hiding evidence and scattering false clues if you're innocent. The Amish community attended every day of the trial, sitting quietly in the back rows. They didn't seek revenge, but they wanted justice. Katie's mother, Sarah Miller, testified about the 3 years of not knowing what had happened to her daughter. David's father described the tools he had kept ready for his son's return. Their quiet dignity in the face of such evil impressed everyone in the courtroom. The prosecutor called Marcus Webb's crimes an act of ultimate betrayal against people who had shown him nothing but kindness. The jury would soon decide his fate. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Marcus Webb was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Harrison called it one of the most heinous crimes in Lancaster County history. The Amish families showed no emotion when the verdict was read. They had expected justice, and justice was served. But their real healing would come later, away from the courtroom. After the trial, the Amish community held a memorial service for David and Katie. They were finally laid to rest in the cemetery where they had planned to be married. The tragedy had tested their faith, but it had also strengthened their bonds with each other. They had learned that evil existed in the world, but they had also seen how love and a community could survive even the worst circumstances. However, the story wasn't quite over. There were still secrets that hadn't been revealed to the public. During the investigation, Detective Santos discovered something that was never revealed to the public. The authorities found evidence that Marcus Webb had been planning similar crimes against other Amish families. In his house, they found maps marking the homes of wealthy Amish farmers. He had been studying their routines, learning when they traveled alone, and identifying the best places to ambush them. David and Katie weren't random victims. They were Marcus's first targets in what could have been a series of robberies and murders. Police found lists of Amish families with notes about their money, their travel patterns, and their vulnerabilities. Marcus had been planning to become a serial killer of Amish people, using their trust and peaceful nature against them. The authorities decided not to release this information to protect the community from additional trauma, but the evidence was locked away in case files, waiting for someone to discover the full scope of Marcus Webb's evil plans. Detective Santos estimated that Marcus Webb was planning to rob and kill at least 6 more Amish families. His notes showed detailed surveillance of their properties and daily routines. He had identified families who lived in isolated areas and traveled predictable routes. The plan was systematic and terrifying. Marcus intended to use the same method each time: ambush them on lonely roads, force them into remote locations, steal their money, then kill them to eliminate witnesses. He had even prepared multiple hiding places throughout the cave system to dispose of bodies and evidence. The killing of David and Katie was supposed to be his first success, followed by more attacks over the coming months. Fortunately, the extensive investigation triggered by their disappearance caught Marcus before he could kill again. The authorities kept this information secret to protect the community's peace of mind. They didn't want Amish families living in fear of an evil that had been stopped. Law enforcement made a difficult decision to keep Marcus Webb's larger plans secret. The Amish community had already suffered enough trauma from David and Katie's murders. Learning that they had all been potential targets might have changed their entire way of life. The Amish value trust, openness, and helping strangers. If they knew Marcus had planned to use these values against them, they might have become suspicious and closed off from the outside world. Detective Santos and Sheriff Bradley decided that protecting the community's faith and way of life was more important than revealing every detail of the case. The evidence was preserved and documented, but it was classified as sensitive information. Only the immediate families and community leaders were told about Marcus's larger plans. This decision would later be criticized by some, but at the time it seemed like the right choice to make. The community was healing, and that was what mattered most. In the years following Marcus Webb's conviction, the Amish community slowly healed from the tragedy. David and Katie's families found ways to honor their memory while moving forward with their lives. Katie's mother, Sarah Miller, started a scholarship fund to help young Amish couples starting their married lives. David's father donated his son's tools to young men who couldn't afford their own. The community built a small memorial garden where David and Katie had planned to build their home. It became a place for quiet reflection and prayer. The tragedy had changed the community, but it hadn't broken their spirit. They still helped strangers and trusted in God's plan, even when that plan was difficult to understand. Marcus Webb remained in prison, serving his life sentence. He never showed remorse for his crimes, claiming he had been desperate and didn't have a choice. But his victims' families had found peace through their faith and their community's support. The David and Katie Schwartz case files were stored in the Lancaster County Sheriff's Department archives. Detective Santos retired in 1995, but she kept copies of all the evidence, including the secret information about Marcus Webb's larger plans. She believed that someday someone would need to know the full truth about what had been prevented. In 2003, a true crime writer named Jennifer Hayes contacted Detective Santos about writing a book on the case. Detective Santos was reluctant at first, but she eventually agreed to share some of the sealed information. The writer was shocked to learn about Marcus Webb's serial killer plans. She asked why this information hadn't been made public 20 years earlier. Detective Santos explained the reasoning, but she admitted that times had changed. Maybe it was time for the full truth to be revealed. The community was stronger now and could handle knowing how close they had come to a much larger tragedy. Jennifer Hayes spent 2 years researching the case and interviewing everyone involved. She discovered additional evidence that had been overlooked or minimized in the original investigation. Marcus Webb had been in contact with other criminals who specialized in robbing rural communities. He had been part of a loose network of people who targeted isolated families across Pennsylvania and Ohio. The network shared information about potential victims and successful robbery techniques. Marcus had been planning to share his Amish community intelligence with other criminals, potentially putting hundreds of families at risk. This network was never fully investigated because authorities focused on Marcus as a lone wolf killer. But Jennifer Hayes found evidence that suggested a larger conspiracy. Her research revealed that other Amish communities in neighboring states had experienced similar unsolved disappearances during the same time period. Were these connected to Marcus Webb's network? The evidence was circumstantial, but disturbing. There might have been more victims than anyone realized. Jennifer Hayes compiled a list of 15 unsolved cases involving Amish or Mennonite families across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana between 1980 and 1985. The cases showed similar patterns to David and Katie's disappearance: young couples traveling alone, vehicles found destroyed or abandoned, and investigations that led nowhere. Some families had been found murdered, others had simply vanished without a trace. The cases were spread across different states and jurisdictions, so no one had connected them before. Hayes contacted law enforcement in each area and shared her findings. Several detectives were interested in reopening their cold cases based on the new information. They began sharing evidence and looking for connections to Marcus Webb's network. The investigation revealed that rural crime networks were more sophisticated than anyone had realized. They used isolation and trust against their victims, just like Marcus had done. The full scope of the conspiracy was still being uncovered decades after the original crimes. By 2005, DNA testing and computer databases had advanced significantly since the 1980s. Cold case investigators began re-examining evidence from the related cases using modern forensic techniques. They found DNA matches that connected several of the unsolved cases to known criminals. Some of these criminals had been associates of Marcus Webb during his crime spree planning. The network was slowly being exposed 20 years after the fact. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb remained in prison, refusing to cooperate with investigators. He claimed he had acted alone and knew nothing about other crimes. But phone records from the 1980s, recently digitized, showed calls between Marcus and several of the suspected network members. The evidence was building for a much larger criminal conspiracy than anyone had imagined. The David and Katie Schwartz case wasn't just a double murder. It was the tip of an iceberg that had hidden a multi-state crime ring targeting peaceful religious communities for decades. As the investigation expanded, families of other victims began coming forward. They had lived with unanswered questions for decades, never knowing what had happened to their loved ones. Emma Stoltzfus from Ohio had lost her brother and sister-in-law in 1984. Their buggy was found burned in a field, but their bodies were never recovered. John Yoder from Indiana had lost his daughter and her husband in 1982. They had disappeared while traveling to a wedding and were never seen again. Each family had their own story of loss and unanswered questions. But now, with new evidence linking the cases, they finally had hope for answers. The families formed a support group, sharing their experiences and working with investigators to solve the cold cases. They didn't seek revenge, following their Amish faith traditions, but they wanted justice and closure. Their quiet strength and dignity impressed everyone who met them. These were people who had suffered in silence for decades, but had never lost their faith. In 2007, Detective Santos, now retired, decided to break her silence about the sealed evidence in the David and Katie Schwartz case. She felt that protecting the community's innocence was less important than catching more criminals and solving more cases. She provided Jennifer Hayes with the complete files, including Marcus Webb's detailed plans and his connections to other criminals. The information was explosive. Marcus had been planning to rob 12 Amish families over 2 years. He had maps, schedules, and detailed notes about each family's vulnerabilities. He had also been in contact with at least 6 other criminals who were planning similar crimes in other states. The evidence suggested a coordinated effort to systematically rob and murder Amish families across the Midwest. Detective Santos felt guilty about keeping this information secret for so long. She wondered how many other families might have been saved if the investigation had been broader from the beginning. The authorities had discovered that Marcus Webb was planning to become a serial killer of Amish families, but they kept this information secret to protect the community. The evidence showed that David and Katie were meant to be the first victims in a series of planned robberies and murders. Marcus had detailed files on multiple families, including their daily routines, travel patterns, and the locations where they kept money. He had prepared multiple hiding places for bodies and evidence throughout the cave system. The authorities decided that revealing this information would terrify the Amish community and change their trusting, peaceful way of life. They made the difficult choice to keep the evidence sealed, even though it might have helped solve other cases. The decision protected the community's innocence, but it may have cost other families their lives in neighboring states. By 2008, investigators had connected Marcus Webb's network to at least 8 other murders and 12 disappearances across 4 states. The cost of keeping his larger plan secret was becoming clear. While the Lancaster County Amish community had been protected from additional trauma, other communities had continued to suffer. If Marcus's network had been exposed immediately, law enforcement could have prevented many of these crimes. The families of other victims felt betrayed when they learned about the sealed evidence. They understood the desire to protect the Amish community, but they argued that their own families deserved protection too. The ethical dilemmas surrounding the case became a subject of debate in law enforcement circles. When is it acceptable to withhold evidence to protect one community, even if it might put other communities at risk? There were no easy answers. The decision made sense in 1986, but it looked different 20 years later, with the benefit of hindsight and new evidence. In 2009, facing new charges related to the other connected cases, Marcus Webb finally agreed to talk to investigators. He was already serving life in prison, so he had nothing to lose. What he revealed was even worse than investigators had imagined. The criminal network had been operating since the late 1970s, targeting not just Amish families, but also other isolated rural communities. They had killed at least 30 people across 6 states. Marcus provided names, locations, and details about crimes that had never been solved. He drew maps showing where bodies were buried and evidence was hidden. His confession helped solve dozens of cold cases, but it also revealed the true scope of evil that had been operating in America's heartland. The network had specifically targeted religious communities because they were trusting, carried cash, and lived in isolated areas. Marcus had been a small part of a much larger and more terrifying criminal organization. Detective Santos, though retired, was asked to participate in Marcus Webb's final interrogation. She wanted to ask him one question that had haunted her for decades. Why had he chosen David and Katie specifically? His answer was chilling in its simplicity. He had seen them that morning at the general store, buying supplies and paying with cash. They looked young, innocent, and trusting. They were perfect victims for his first planned murder. Marcus showed no remorse, even after 26 years in prison. He talked about David and Katie like they were objects, not human beings with families who loved them. Detective Santos left the interrogation feeling sick but satisfied. She finally had complete closure on the case that had defined her career. The evil was contained, the network was exposed, and justice had been served. But she knew that David and Katie's families would carry their pain forever, even with all the answers finally revealed. Their bodies were found in the cave system where Marcus Webb had buried them after the murders. They were laid to rest in the Amish cemetery in Lancaster County, in the spot where they had planned to be married. But their story didn't end with their burial. The David and Katie Schwartz Memorial Foundation was established to help other families of crime victims find closure and healing. Their tragic deaths had exposed a criminal network that was stopped before it could kill dozens more innocent people. In a way, their sacrifice saved countless other lives. The Amish community believes that God can bring good from even the worst evil. David and Katie's legacy became one of protection and prevention, helping other families avoid the same tragedy. Their love story, cut short by violence, had become a force for justice and healing. Today, the David and Katie Schwartz case is studied in law enforcement academies as an example of how local crimes can be connected to larger criminal networks. Their story changed how police investigate missing persons cases in rural communities. It also highlighted the importance of sharing information between different jurisdictions and not keeping evidence secret, even with good intentions. The Amish community in Lancaster County still remembers David and Katie with love and respect. Their memorial garden blooms every spring with flowers planted by community members who never forgot their story. The case reminds us that evil can hide behind familiar faces and friendly smiles. But it also shows us that love, community, and faith can survive even the worst tragedies. David and Katie's final embrace before their buggy disappeared into the Pennsylvania countryside was not truly their last goodbye. Their memory lives on in the lives they saved and the justice they helped bring to other families. Some stories end with death, but the best ones continue with love that never dies. The haunting case of David and Katie Schwartz remains one of America's most chilling missing person stories, a true crime mystery that transformed from a simple disappearance into a cold case exposing a terrifying criminal network. This Amish couple vanished. 1983 story demonstrates how a single missing persons investigation can uncover unsolved mysteries spanning multiple states. What began as two young people who disappeared without a trace became a suspenseful missing person story that vanished couple investigators will never forget. The Amish couple disappearance story serves as a stark reminder that mysterious disappearances can hide darker truths. Their real-life mystery proves that even in peaceful communities, unsolved missing person cases can reveal disturbing Amish disappearance scenarios that challenge our understanding of rural crime. This true crime disappearance story continues to captivate those fascinated by famous missing person cases and real unsolved mysteries that shaped modern investigative techniques.